My name is Shrikant. You probably, if you are a speaker, then you heard from me, and if you were a delegate, you probably heard from Nadeem in terms of some registration and other details. As Nadeem has mentioned, this is fifth, and this is the agenda, just in case you missed it on your email. I'll start, in fact, I've done this in all summits, and I don't know whether every time I go on stage for the next summit, I always have this challenge that I should do something new. For those of you who are new to this event, all our event presentations are archived. So you can go to the previous versions of the summit and you can get those presentations. And what would be new this time around is that we are also video recording it, which means that not only you will have just the presentation, but also hopefully the YouTube or whatever channel we are going to create, you will have those presentations archived so that you could view it later, or you could share it with some of your colleagues and contacts, etc. Okay? So that's the new sort of flavor to this event. I'll go first, and as I said, I will talk more from a standards update. In fact, loosely speaking, what we have tried to do is that in the morning sessions, we have tried to keep it very technology focused. Also because of the fact that Bangalore is probably one of the Wi-Fi hubs in the world from a technology development point of view. Almost every Wi-Fi company has some center either doing R&D or doing some testing, etc. So it's a very unique case where we are in a place where a lot of Wi-Fi work relevant throughout the world is happening. Okay? It's not that common. Very few sites I can pick across the globe, maybe Bay Area, Shanghai, Taiwan, and then possibly Bangalore. So these 4 or 5 sites, maybe Israel. So these 5 sites, I think, probably do the bulk of the Wi-Fi work throughout the world. Okay? And what we have, Nadeem has just put up a list of companies who have been involved. In fact, I think last night he told me that he could count 80 different companies, representatives being here, which is, I think, a very significant move, because when we started this way back in 2016 at IIT Madras, we probably never thought that we would get to this level. We wanted to keep it probably some kind of an academic and maybe have a few industries there. So I think it's just grown organically, and let's hope that that trend continues as we move ahead. So the morning session is going to be more technology, and just to give you a flavor, I'll try and hopefully provide some new technology and standards update compared to what I've done over the last few summits. Satish from Nokia will talk to us about what's happening, Wi-Fi and 5G sort of, where is the union and where are new things coming there. Mani from QCA has always participated in most of our summits. 802.11ax, he's actually working on that, so there's no better person than somebody who's probably facing the heat of getting 11ax into market right there. Then we have a tea break, and we will, sorry, I probably, the sessions might maybe just a typo here, but post the tea break, that's not 1:15 as you can see, we will not have that long a tea break, trust me, okay? So Sendil from Kubercom will look at home mesh. So what we have also tried to do is that we have tried to pick the speakers with topics which we thought would cover the gamut of Wi-Fi, sort of different flavors of Wi-Fi. What we see is one is 11ax, the other we see is the home Wi-Fi or the mesh, the other is the 5G Wi-Fi. So hopefully together they will provide a sort of comprehensive view of where all Wi-Fi is going into, and hopefully we get to hear from those experts who are working in that area. So Sendil and his company are doing a lot of work. Sendil, in fact, was involved in some of the open source mesh implementation. So he is the right person, just like Mani is the right person to talk, or Satish is the right person to talk about 5G. So we have luckily the right people. Karan will talk about, he's also a creator of various tools in Mojo. So Karan will talk about voice and related things going over Wi-Fi. Then we have Gagan, who they are actually looking at high density Wi-Fi from a test equipment perspective. So based on our request, they have run a lot of tests, and I'm sure in the last hour or so, I'm sure Gagan has put together a lot of those data and made an insightful presentation on what is happening with Wi-Fi and high density. And then Jatin will talk about another interesting area where we'll have this location-based services. So hopefully, In the morning session, we would have covered the technology aspects which we think are relevant for Wi-Fi. And then the afternoon session is going to be different in the sense that we are actually going to put all our intelligence to solving some of the pressing problems maybe. So BharatNet, rural Wi-Fi. So we have Paramjeet from WBA just possibly kicking off this whole session talking about certain initiatives from WBA. Manish also from Reliance talking about rolling out Wi-Fi. These may not be immediately relevant to rural, but just kick-starting the session. Then Professor Jalihal is here. He has worked a lot with police department in Tamil Nadu. So he will talk about the experience and possibly ideas of how we can use Wi-Fi and BharatNet for police communication. Sendil, another Sendil, who is his own startup, is a person who is deploying these mesh solutions. So it's one thing to talk about those, and the other thing is somebody who has a sort of a real life feel for what is happening. So Sendil will talk us through. In fact, if you go online, you can find his presentations in Battle Mesh and other places. So he's made his mark in a global community. We also have somebody from the government circle talking about their vision for broadband proliferation. And finally, we also, for the rural, though we talk about Wi-Fi and maybe related technologies, there are other pieces of the puzzle which need to be completed. So we have a very interesting presentation. Let me not reveal too much so that Mani Sridhar can talk about what Google's, Alphabet X is trying to do, where they have actually done some demonstration, okay? We also have the ThinkFest Awards in between, where the presentations of the 5 shortlisted members will be shown to you. 4 video, 1 person will be here on stage. And then finally a panel discussion which will talk about the rural Wi-Fi. This will again involve people from industry, people from the government, and so hopefully that will round out our day. We'll try and keep a very tight time check that we know Bangalore traffic, so 5 o'clock is our deadline, so we might slip just a little bit. So hopefully please cooperate so that we can all finish in time. And as Nadeem mentioned, we'll not have any introductions of speakers, no bouquets for speakers, sorry speakers, so we'll just get to the point and hopefully we'll be finishing on time, okay? So with that, I think I'll get started. Just a few pointers before getting started. Mic runners, who are the mic runners? So what we want to promote is a lot of interaction. So on 2 flanks you have Vignesh. If you're on this side, just put up your hand, Vignesh will come to you. Just put up your hand at the end of the presentation when it's open for questions. Or if the speaker is asking you for, hey, I'm okay for questions, I think we'll leave it a little bit open. But being a large audience, I think we will probably have the questions towards the end, okay? So thanks with that. And just to point out that you can log into Wi-Fi. You can take a look at it in the break. You will see all kinds of fancy wires dangling, and we have just connected these access points provided by Mojo. So these are the credentials. You should have got some email. If you don't have, Anubhav, whom should they contact? Desk? So Tarun or maybe the registration desk. During one of the breaks, feel free to contact. There is a rate limitation, so don't measure speeds because of having a big crowd. We've also made sure that we don't run into problem halfway through the session where it's all exhausted for everybody. So there is a rate limit. So you obviously cannot do everything that you wish to do, and speed tests are not the right way to measure this particular performance because we have kind of capped it at certain rates, okay? So I think we have covered most of what we have. So I think with that, I'm also on time for my talk. So let me jump on to that. And again, just a request, please feel free to interact. I think that's what we want to promote. We have budgeted for enough time for interaction so that we will get a feeling that this is more of a discussion rather than a conference. So with that, let me start. So good morning once more. My name is Srikanth, coming from NanoCell Networks. And as I said, every summit I'm kind of doing the first talk, and I'm kind of always under the gun saying, what should I do new? Because every 6 months I'm on stage, and now I'm going to be recorded as well. So which means that I can't cheat my way through. Presentations are also archived. So luckily for me, one of the things is that Wi-Fi is also moving fast, that almost every 6 months I at least have something new to share, okay? So I kind of thought about it and said, let me give a status update. And this status update will be a little bit stretched, primarily looking at maybe some things which are just on the horizon. And then I will probably end with a sort of a vision for where I see Wi-Fi going, okay? And what I will also try and weave in is also point to other presentations which might cover some of those aspects in detail. What Satish might talk, or Mani, or Sendil, or some other people, okay? Okay, so for those of you who are probably somewhat new to Wi-Fi, you might have seen me use this slide earlier, minor updates because of new standards. You can see Wi-Fi is a very fast moving standard with lots of alphabet extensions. These are the mainstream alphabet extensions, primarily in terms of this is what people would refer to as, oh, I got this generation Wi-Fi or this Wi-Fi. What is new? Okay, let me also maybe spend a moment. Where are we? We are in 11AC Wave 2 with this multi-user MIMO as the hot topic in terms of people saying this is the current thing that you should have. Everybody wants to pitch multi-user MIMO as the next big thing, right? And what is coming up and already making a lot of news in the market, about which Mani will spend more time, is 11AX, right? Now, if you look at 11AX versus 11AC, you don't see bandwidth changes. When I say bandwidth changes, RF bandwidth changes. Spectrum, of course, it will still be 2.4 and 5. In fact, 11AC forced everybody to adopt 5 gigahertz. 11AX comes back and says both 2.4 and 5 are applicable to this standard. And it doesn't, unlike the 600 Mbps to 7 gigabit per second peak rate improvement, which was afforded, 7 gigabit per second applies to both the 60 gigahertz as well as 11AC. We have a minor jump in peak rate from 7 gigabit per second up to about 10 gigabit per second, close to, not the exact number, but just around that. So this standard is the first standard in the Wi-Fi game which is not about peak rate improvement. That's one of the things I probably want to just put in new. And as I mentioned, many people say 2.4 is dead, but you can see 11AX is still not lost its belief in 2.4. And in fact, I'll highlight where that 2.4 is more likely to be emphasized as far as 11AX is concerned, okay? What about the status of 60 gigahertz? That was supposed to be the next big thing. 11AD is standardized close to 5 years back. We still don't have any mainstream products to speak of, but guess what? We have another standard coming, 11AY. So you might often wonder why they're jumping to a new standard when the old standard itself has not really taken off in a big way. Multiple reasons, but I would have a short comment at this time saying that 11AD, 11AY, 60 gigahertz is not completely dead. Okay, it's not completely buried. Okay, it still has some life, and I will, towards the end, I will share some insights and possibly make a sort of comment on where it could possibly come. What is probably dead is, for those of you who might have watched this alphabet and say something is missing, is 11AH. For those of you who might have followed the 11AH or Wi-Fi Halo, that is probably buried, is what my gut feeling. Again, I could come back 6 months later and say, well, there's something in 11AH, but it looks like it's buried, okay? So, as a part of where we are, I just want to kind of just briefly look at the hottest thing today in the products, which is multi-user MIMO in 11AC. Is it really hot? That's kind of what I would like to ask. And the quick answer, of course, obviously these things are not black and white. So obviously there are so many shades there. But in general, I would say MU MIMO is a little disappointing. And I have listed down all the reasons. I'm not necessarily going to spend time there. But in general, I would say that MU MIMO has very limited sort of potential in terms of solving problems. It does not cover range. It does not cover, efficiencies of the whole process is a question mark, okay? And you need the right set of clients, which is a problem. We don't have enough MU MIMO clients to justify an MU MIMO 11AC, etc. So in one sense, I'm putting a dampener on the current hot feature, which is MU MIMO Wave 2 is probably not such a hot thing as what it might have been marketed or talked to, okay? So when it came to 11AX, the overarching problem which was presented for the standardization was what we call as high density. HD. In fact, I mentioned that Gagan will talk more about what is the problem, and he will maybe give some insights of what they have found by experimentation. Alithia will talk about that using their own methodology for testing. So I'm sure he will have more data. But in general, what we have found after looking at the MU-MIMO feature in 11AC Wave 2 is that there are too many problems, which I have listed here. You can take a look at that. And that makes 11AC MU-MIMO not a great fit for the high density use case. You might wonder, what is so big about high density? It's the big thing primarily because estimates are that even in a home, there are going to be how many 50 to 100 devices is the estimate by people. So this is probably conservative because 3GPP MTC estimate is 200 devices per home, right? From the IoT point of view and so on. So it's no more a joke because people have multiple devices. People around us have multiple APs, all those things. So we are living in a very high density sort of Wi-Fi scenario. And unfortunately, 11AC multi-user MIMO quite doesn't provide the solution for solving that problem. Okay? I would say that was the #1 trigger for going into 11AX. So 11AX, if you ask one major thing that it's trying to attack, it is how can we do a better job of this high density which we are all going to face, whether it is in the home, whether it is in the office, or in a public scenario. Okay? Because Wi-Fi, I mean, not to blame Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi never had this as a problem. Almost overarching problem for Wi-Fi was always, how can we be close to Ethernet speeds? If you look at the history of 11A to 11N standardization, it was all about how can I get close to a wired network speed, because that's where in the initial stage that's what we were competing for. I would say 11AC probably did not have that pressure. So, but probably got carried away by that momentum of saying, oh, we should do that, get it to gigabit per second. And then it so happened that they realized that that's not the track where we need to go. We need to go on a different track where we need to support this high density, lots of users, lots of APs with lots of users. So how does 11AX solve this in a nutshell? In a nutshell, what 11AX does is parallelize transmissions to multiple users from an AP. That seems okay because we were doing downlink MU-MIMO, which was similar, but we have a few additions that we can do either MU-MIMO or OFDMA or a combination. All of these are possibilities. But more interestingly, and sometimes often in my discussions, people find this much more difficult, multiple users talking to the AP at the same time, which we call as an uplink multi-user. Okay? So that the combinations of downlink plus uplink multi-user, where we efficiently also convey the schedule along with the data, that becomes, I would say, the #1 feature as far as 11AX is concerned, right? Where we are trying to pack transmissions to and from multiple users without wasting all the times associated with accessing the medium. So that becomes the important stuff. Even including things like acknowledgements need to be carried efficiently. For those of you who know the nitty-gritties, 802.11 ACK is very important for the robustness of the protocol. We need to carry that efficiently. Okay? So in a summary, if I want to put all the things, after having given you a flavor of the top point, 11AX, of course, I would say the #1 would be this OFDMA and multi-user techniques. There is also something called as spatial reuse, which I think is still not really going to kick off till we figure out all the nitty-gritties there. Then what I mentioned that 2.4 is coming back in 11AX, and the reason is that we don't see huge bandwidth potential there, but we see a potential that IoT support can be better in 2.4. So which means that we will have an IoT class device, 11AX, which interestingly what it did was brought all features of 11AH, which is Wi-Fi Halo, which was devised specifically for IoT, but operating on a sub 1 GHz band. It took all those features and brought it to the 2.4, possibly even 5, but we expect that more IoT 2.4, especially the low cost, low power segment, will be parked there. Okay? So these two, I would say, are very important trends. the OFDMA multi-user, IoT support in 2.4. A few other things like how to make people buy new equipment, we need to give them some carrot there. A few other things for outdoor, etc., etc., right? Now all this was done on a little bit of a fast track with respect to standardization, primarily because we had this LTE unlicensed camp breathing down Wi-Fi's neck and telling that Wi-Fi is no good for enterprise environments or service provider environments, etc. So 11AX is trying to kind of push back on that particular comment and say that, hey, we can also do a good job. And so that's where 11AX's focus is. Okay? Wi-Fi competition, which is what I alluded to just a minute back, primarily LTE unlicensed in the form of for a carrier LTE-U LAA, right? These are license assisted access and LTE unlicensed. These are especially LAA is a 3GPP standard, primarily where a carrier or a service provider can bundle licensed plus unlicensed spectrum together. That is one of the things that has been raised as a competition for Wi-Fi in service provider segment. And multi-fire, which is a standalone LTE based unlicensed technology. So that's the competition which is coming in for enterprise environments or similar environments where service provider licensed spectrum is not there. Okay? Now a small note as well is that Wi-Fi has not given up completely on the linkage with service providers. We also have a 3GPP standard where we have LWA and LWIP, which is LTE Wi-Fi aggregation in slightly different forms, right? And I'm sure Satish will highlight more about the 5G efforts in terms of how Wi-Fi is going to come into the cellular in a probably more seamless way without all the talk that we heard. Okay? Now, we have heard this story for quite some time. Oh, this LTE unlicensed is coming. Where are the deployments? What is the plan? So I looked up GSM Association's data, and this is 2018 Jan data, where you can see that wherever you see those colors, these are either having one of those deployments which I suggested, LAA, LTU, LWA, LWIP, and the number of operators in countries like US tends to be larger than in some other countries. Okay? Now, the same document from GSM Association also contains the various chipset announcements from both the carrier side, from the handset maker side, as well as the equipment vendor side's sort of announcements in terms of base station-like products supporting these features. Okay? So this is the first time where we have at least found that in a global map there are a few places which are filling up. Still, I think it's a work in progress. I don't think it's right now Wi-Fi competition, but maybe if it's successful and if it proliferates, maybe it might have its impact, which we do not know as to how whether it can get to the consumer sort of market. Okay, okay, so that's on the rates, feeds, and possibly some 11AX. Now I want to kind of quickly spend some time on other features of Wi-Fi. All of them actually have 802.11 alphabet extensions as well. Unfortunately, those alphabet extensions are not as powerful as the N and AC and AX kind of extensions, because these tend to be more of sort of interest to the developer and maybe a slightly smaller set of people. So security, of course, already quite, I would say, mature. QoS, very prevalent in products, not used as much effectively, I would say. I think Karan will talk about the voice specific stuff. So maybe there is something to be said about how we can possibly improve things there. It is becoming important, right? Because we are running Wi-Fi calling now, so it's very important. Mesh, about which Sendil will talk, mesh and WDS, etc. Very hot technology in the home segment. You look at companies like Eero or Plume or Netgear Orbi, or everybody is after that. Mobility, believe it or not, I was jokingly telling somebody that mobility is becoming important even in the home Wi-Fi products now, because you have multiple Wi-Fi boxes and people are doing a Wi-Fi call and moving from one AP to another AP, so mobility is coming there. IoT handling, definitely we have many vendors announcing products there. And this is a classical way by which especially enterprise vendors differentiate it, doing all kinds of fancy channel selection, power selection. You'll hear the word band steering. All these things bamboozle people into, saying that Wi-Fi is under control, when actually it is not so easy to control, okay, especially the client side. And of course, Jatin will talk more about the location and application. This has been an ongoing area, probably going to mature in the next few years. So let me start with this. Why do we need multiple APs at home? Very simple, that we probably saw an opportunity where Wi-Fi was becoming extremely critical. People wanted better Wi-Fi signal, especially 5 gigahertz signal. Running wires, power line, all that has been tried, not scalable. And luckily, I think it just so happened that 2 radio and 3 radio access point chipsets, which came into the market in a big way, enabled people to position those products and make this wireless backhaul very, very easy. And so you have all these 2-box products, 3-box products, and as you know, Plume puts out a small mosquito repellent kind of an attachment which you can just put it in your plug point, okay? So that's the extent that we will possibly have every room having its own Wi-Fi access point without the user having to worry about the backhaul, no wires, etc. And the user equipment will seamlessly connect to the right AP, mobility for handling Wi-Fi calling, etc. is coming, okay? So now comes the next question is, all these RRM, band steering, etc., which have been announced by various vendors, how are they going to now kind of manifest themselves, given that clients don't support those features? Clients have a mind of their own, and APs think that they can control the client, and it's not happening. So Wi-Fi Alliance recently has come up with 2 programs called multi-band optimization, the other called optimized connectivity experience. And the idea is to basically allow the AP and clients to coordinate and do a nice job of all the features that we are talking about: band steering, association control, handling mobility, and new things as well, okay? So these 2 programs are on the anvil. Both certifications are open now as of today, and we are just hoping that with these certification programs, things will be a lot smoother in a multi-AP environment. Remember, multi-AP environment is not just relevant to the enterprise, it's coming to your home, okay? It's been sold very well in the home market, okay? So do we need new IEEE standards? And I said that there are other alphabet extensions which are hiding. And of course, some of you who have been working might know 11K handles all the radio measurements. 11V allows you to go push clients to the respective access points. 11R for moving fast. 11U for contacting the AP prior to association. 11W for protecting the management frames, and a few extra information elements. So we don't need new standards. In fact, a lot of these standards were gathering dust, and MBO and OCE are trying to use them because there is a market, and they're trying to match the sort of market needs with the existing standards, okay? So we are hoping that now with these initiatives coming to both enterprise, service provider, as well as home market, we'll have a better sort of multi-AP coordination along with the stations cooperating, okay? Last note is that OCE does not just stop with that managing the multiple clients. One of the problems that people have faced is that when we enter a new AP, we take a lot of time to connect, especially the entire process. So OCE, as one of the optional initiatives, also allows this fast initial link setup, where you use just very few frames and you're quickly ready to get on with Wi-Fi, including the DHCP address. So which means that you have a quick way of getting into an access point, transacting for that very short while that you might be actually in touch, and then move on without spoiling the show for anybody, okay? And final note on 60 gigahertz, where are we? As I said, it still hasn't died completely. So where has it not died? So people like Facebook have kept it a little bit alive, primarily for backhaul. So if you're interested, you can look at Telegraph from Facebook. Some of you might be aware of that. similar initiatives are there with other people. It's still, nobody can consider that as a success. But lots of interesting technologies have been used, mesh and other things have been used in Terragraph. And the hope is that someday, somewhere it might kickstart the whole 60 gigahertz. Interestingly, there are some high-end device makers who are interested in 60 gigahertz primarily for some VR kind of applications. So we don't know whether they'll be successful. If they are successful, I think it'll open up that 60 gigahertz sort of area and make it more robust, stable, and so on. Okay. So as I said, it's not dead, and there is a new standard which is addressing some of the lacuna in the old standards. So I think we should just keep an eye out whether 60 gigahertz will come to market. Well, how is the AP evolving? Of course, station is also evolving, but probably AP is doing a lot more from those old days of one stick antenna to so many fancy antennas, doing so many things now, whether mesh, IoT, etc. I think Senthil will talk a little bit about what they are providing for some of their customers, and I'm sure many guys are trying to do this and differentiate themselves. And finally, I'll end up with this. I put up this slide when I was talking to some vendor last week, and I was in US where Trump was saying, how can we make America great? So I said, okay, let me also put what we need for making Wi-Fi great. Of course, 11AX for all the use. Don't forget that IoT could also be a use case. Multi-band optimization and OCE, hopefully coming to your home as well. No more low rate beacons, probe frames. 11W, I don't know if you have heard the recent initiative of Wi-Fi Alliance, WPA3 is coming, which will clean up the security even more. Multi-AP mesh interoperability is coming. And what I forgot to add is maybe a small box where I say 60 gigahertz, so that I give you a flavor that it still has some life. Okay? So with that, my time is up. So I think I have 5 minutes of questions. Since I'm monitoring time, I'm kind of okay. So any questions, happy to take. Please get that. And you can raise your hand, the next person can be there.
Hi Srikanth, Kannan here. Thanks for the knowledge. One question I have is, you have spoken about low power consumption in access point, which seems to be one of the bigger challenges when you are doing at high density deployments, right? Looking at switches all over the place, the power over Ethernet cables and interfaces. So do you have any thought on that?
So as of now, there is no standardized move for the low power implementations on the AP side. In fact, if not anything, and Mani may be a better person to answer, 11X AP will generally consume more power than a comparable 11AC AP. Yes, but yeah. In enterprise world, they are still looking at the PoE based.
Something called dual PoE that goes up to 35 watts consumption, power consumption.
So I'll just repeat what Mani might, you not have heard it. So generally, I think there is some move to support some higher PoE powers. And is there a move to also support a 11AX SOC with less power than 11AC as well? Please give him the mic.
I don't think that is currently in the plan, because the move is over increasing the bandwidth, increasing the range rather than decreasing the power consumption. You have to cater to so many clients in high density. You need to have good amount of power put out so that you can be heard by everyone. Yeah. So the move is more likely to stick with PoE budgets, but at the SOC level, we may not be doing anything to actually reduce the power.
And correct me if I'm wrong, most of that power would be processing power rather than the RF power, correct?
Correct.
So I think 11AX, if at all I see in the initial versions, would be a high duty, or a heavy duty power consuming AP. We still have, as I said, 3 more minutes. If you have questions, feel free. One at the back, then we'll take Bhuvnesh's question.
So maybe this is for Mani more than you. When are we expecting 802.11 AX chipsets or AX based APs to hit the market, and devices, of course?
So let me answer that, Bhuvnesh, so that we don't put money in the spot. From public domain information, AP vendors have announced 11AX APs for this year. So Aero Hive is one which has made a lot of news, but almost all public domain announcements have been made by major AP, enterprise AP vendors, and possibly also some retail vendors, Huawei and TP-Link, etc. 11AX chipset, this is what I would say, talking to various parties. I think 2019 and beyond is when mature products are likely to be available, but I'm sure that there is a race to get the first 11AX product into the market. That will happen in 2018. Good luck if you buy that. Yeah. Yeah.
The AC Wave 2,
Yeah.
you told they're using a MMO, we call multi. So we thought that it will improve the throughput and the efficiency of the overall system, but you are telling that it is not helping as much. So could you please throw some light on that quickly?
Yes. In fact, I mean, as I said, none of these issues are black and white. So I tried to capture what I thought might be a majority sort of viewpoint. I will stick my neck out and say that 11AC MU MIMO is practically useless, and so I can get some more discussion going there. It's a good lab feature. It's a feature which has very limited use in my opinion, but the way 11AC MU MIMO is designed, it's only going to get you those numbers if you have all the right things in place. So in a certain sense, and why it is because as I've tried to list and I've tried to portray that in the figure, for sending this multi-user data, we actually spend a lot of what we call overhead, as well as, in fact, I've not shown the overhead below here. These overheads are not carried in MU. So for doing MU, you do a lot of SU, and that too in a very inefficient SU way. So 11AC MU MIMO, if you have an option, and I know of many vendors who have actually bought those products and turned that MU MIMO feature off, okay? Because they actually get lower throughput with MU MIMO rather than with MU MIMO. But there is hope. 11AX MU MIMO is not the same as 11AC MU MIMO. Because it has an uplink MU associated, so you will find that 11AX MU MIMO will probably make the MU MIMO much more useful in practice. 11AC MU MIMO, for various reasons, did not possibly think through all the matters. Okay? Yeah. Last question, one more we can have, and then I'll have to hand over.
What would be the transmitting power of this Wi-Fi? Because you were explaining about this concept of having multiple APs in a small house. So, for example, a 2 BHK house, if you have multiple APs, how will you do optimization of it? That's the bigger.
That's a good question. That, as you remember, I put out this other slide saying that now when we put APs in an enterprise or a high density environment, we put APs, literally speaking, every 10 meters or even closer. Some deployment folks can tell what is the high density. So in those cases, what they have as a radio resource management feature is also a power control, an automatic power control built into the access point, which will make sure that they don't unnecessarily trample upon the coverage area of a neighboring access point from the same SSID. Same techniques are going to come into the home segment as well, where APs, multi-APs belonging to the same SSID, generally of the same manufacturer as of today, will figure out what is the correct power levels. So those power levels, as you know, the highest power levels are the orders of 100 to 200 milliwatts, but in the high density case, power levels are very close to 3 to 4 dBm, which is, we are talking about single digit milliwatts. So you buy a 100 milliwatt product, but you actually use it at sub 10 milliwatt. That is happening today in the high density case. And I expect that in the home, depending on your home, the power control mechanism will automatically kick in and get us to the appropriate power levels of the access point. Even the channel, so all these features, the bundle called RRM includes channel selection, power, few other optimizations. All of them are coming to the home market as well. It was not there because we never had any reason to do those things in the home. But with multi-AP products, makes sense now that you want to get all those gizmos into the AP as well. Okay? Thanks. I think my time is up. I'll stop. I'll hand it over to Satish.